time for us to get started. Actually, I'm a minute early according to my clock, but according to that clock, we're right on time. So we'll get started based off of that clock. So this morning we're going to be in Ecclesiastes chapter 7. And we'll be working through this chapter as far as we can get. I noticed yesterday when I was studying and as I was kind of writing up my notes that this is going to be tough to get through in one class. But luckily I have the next class, so I can roll over a little bit and we can pick up where we leave off, wherever we end up at. So before we get started, I'd like to just start us off with a word of prayer, and then we'll dive into Ecclesiastes chapter 7. Father in heaven, we are so blessed this morning to be able to assemble together as a group and open your word. We are thankful, Father, that you've provided for us throughout this week beautiful weather. You've given us many things to comfort us. You've given us each other. You've given us opportunities to come together and study your word. And individually, you've given us opportunity to enjoy your blessings. And we pray, Father, that here this morning, as we are enjoying the blessing of your word, that we'll open Ecclesiastes and receive the wisdom from this book with an open heart. There's many great lessons we can learn from the writer, and we know that as we are working through this book, that if we take it to heart and receive that message, that we will be in a great place as we live our life here on this earth. And Father, we thank you so much for providing for us this wisdom. We ask that as we are trying to interpret this wisdom, that you'll help us and you'll guide us, and that ultimately we'll come to conclusions that are in accordance with your will. It's in your Son, Jesus' name, that we pray. Amen. Okay. I was hoping to get this a little higher, but I'll just hunch over a little bit when I need to read. So we're again in Ecclesiastes chapter 7. Up until this point, we have been observing lots of things about the vanities that this life has for us, as we have observed Solomon or the writer, depending on how you interpret that, bringing out. And so we've noticed the cycles of nature, the emptiness of wealth, the pleasures and the toils that all end in vanity. And as you're going to see here in chapter 7, we've demonstrated vanity very, very well to this point. We're going to switch now kind of the way that we're talking in our conversation. The writer is going to show us a new viewpoint. And we're going to start getting a bunch of wisdom. And so up until this point, we haven't really got a bunch of these better than statements we're about to enter into. And I think that is because we had to diagnose the problem fully before we got there through chapter 6, all the way through chapter 6. Now we got left with the question, now what? We've diagnosed the problem. Everything's vanity. There's nothing really that's worth shooting for, right? So what do we do now? And that's where chapter 7 kind of starts to fill in those gaps, that next question that we might have. It's the structural midpoint of the book too, which is interesting. And you'll notice here also, the end of chapter 6, the question there in verse 12 says, "For who knows what is good for man in life? All the days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow. Who can tell a man what will happen after him under the sun?" Solomon or the writer is going to tell us now what we should be doing here in this life. And so we're going to enter into this first couple of verses here. And I want to propose to you kind of a new perspective. Maybe you've considered this before. I think it's a good perspective to look at, though, as you're going through the book of Ecclesiastes. As we step through this, you're going to notice the better than statements. And a lot of these better than statements are going to be pretty simple concepts for a Christian, for somebody with faith, to be able to accept, because we know this to be true from other places in the Bible. But I want us to take it from the perspective of, why is this wisdom good for somebody who doesn't even have God in their life? Why is this a better than statement that's true in all aspects of life, not just the man who has God in his life? And as we ask that question, we're going to find that those things are going to align. The things that God has provided for us as wisdom of the way we should live life is the way that a life just in general is going to be good here on this earth. It's going to be satisfying. But I think it's good to take it from that perspective. And so, again, we've diagnosed the problem. Vanity, all the vanities that we have, all the things that we have in our life, all the things that we work towards without God in the picture is going to end up in dissatisfaction. And so we begin here with the better than statements. And the Hebrew word here is T-O-B. Tav, I think is how you say that. I'm not 100% sure. It means better, but it's repeated deliberately through this and echoes a lot of the statements you'll find in like Proverbs. But you'll notice that here, as we start getting into these verses here, I want you to take notice also of how counterintuitive the verses we're about to read are to the way that people propose a good life looks here on earth today when you don't have God. You'll notice that there's a lot of things that we say are better, and it's not including wealth. It's not better to have more wealth. It's not going to include a lot of pleasure. It's a lot of things. A lot of people say that you've lived a good life, you've had lots of experiences and had a lot of good places that you've seen and done things at. You accumulate a lot of wealth. Perhaps that's a signal or of satisfaction, or that you've achieved something in life, and even fame. Your name has been among many people's mouths. That is not the measure that the writer here is going to give us as the measure of a good, satisfying life. And so we begin here in verse 1. And it says, "A good name is better than precious ointment, the day of death and the day of one's birth." And so we know here this concept of a good name. We know about reputation. We know that a reputation is very valuable. But the comparison that's made here is that fine ointment, or precious ointment, or perfume, whatever you'd like to use here, this expensive, luxurious item, which we've talked about previously before in other lessons. This is a very expensive thing, one of the most expensive things. In fact, we anoint kings with oil. It's something that we read about in the New Testament as something very valuable, when there's the woman washing Jesus' feet with oil, and Judas talks about how this would have been better for them to use all those funds to give to the poor. It's an expensive item. And so for a more modern kind of way of thinking about this, you might read something like, "A good name is better than owning Amazon." Something like that, right? Something really almost out of reach for a lot of people in this world would be something really extravagant like that. A good name is better than those things. Why is that? Well, precious ointments, things of that nature, all those things that we're gathering throughout this life, those are things that we can get, we can have, but we can also lose those very quickly. And even if we do gather those things again, they're easy to lose, and they don't come with us either. However, after we pass away. However, we work very long and hard to build our name and our reputation. We take lots of time and care making sure that the reputation we're building is the person who we are. And when we deviate from that, when we break what we've built, it doesn't come back very quickly. In fact, it's just a very long and hard process to get back to that. And at the end of it all, we get to this point where we pass away, and then what? What's left? It's not the precious ointment, it doesn't come with us, but the name carries on. And so you might think of George Washington here, right? So George Washington, what do we know about George Washington? Did lots of cool things. He was part of the revolution that we went through. He was a general, all those great things. Can anybody tell me about his house? How about the kind of horse that he rode around on? Maybe somebody could tell me about his gun. I'm sure there's somebody here who can do that. But maybe, what about his gun? What kind of gun did he use? Right. So here we see the wisdom is very true. You might think of other people in history, Abraham Lincoln, other people who have done great things. And a lot of times you'll think of things that they've done or things that they have. Now, I will grant you, if you think of an artist, you're probably going to be able to remember their works because those kind of have been preserved through time. But again, if you think of an artist, you'll find that the things that they put in their painting and the works that they've done, you will go back to their name rather than the paintings themselves sometimes. And so we're looking at this and we're seeing, all right, as a Christian, I know that it's good for my name to be better than anything that I can gather that. I can work on that. I can get to a point where my name is really good. But then we get to the second part of this verse here, verse 1. It says, "The day of death, and the day of death, than the day of one's birth." Okay. So these two phrases go together. But this one's harder for me to interpret a little bit. And so I want to ask the question, why is the day of someone's death better than the day of one's birth? Why is it better for somebody who has been brought into this earth and it gets to experience life? Why is that not better than the day when somebody's life ends? And if you take it from the perspective of somebody who has been looking through the lens of this problem of everything is vanity, everything that we are going through in the first 6 chapters of this book, why would it be better for that person to realize that death is better than the day of one's birth?
It's not the first time he's brought up this idea. We see him bring it up before in chapter 4, right at the beginning, where he is essentially making the point that it's better to be dead rather than to live because you're no longer going through the struggles on this earth.
Right.
So I think there's probably an element of that being brought forth again here, right? That, the people who are dead, they are no longer dealing with the troubles of this world, right? So people who are being born, that's nice, but they're about to go through all of the sorrows and the issues and the things I've already brought up previously. And I think something that will make this statement clearer as we go forward is that, right, when you consider this idea from the perspective of the righteous or the man of God, right, the day of death means you are leaving this mortal struggle and you're truly becoming part of what is eternal, right? You're truly embracing eternity, which you're unable to do here. Right.
Yes, that's exactly in line with what I had in my notes as well. The end of a life is the end of utility of the life from the perspective of somebody who has the vanities of this life plaguing them. And so, to that end, the only thing that you would carry from that is your name. Once you complete this life, your name. So these two verses relate here because a good name matters at death. It doesn't matter if you have a name yet. Maybe something from your parents, but still you are there. Your own name, yes. But what is remembered when you end your life? So the thing here that I would propose to you is that as you're living your life, even without God, you have this idea that you need to be building a name for yourself. All the things that you're trying to accumulate, all those things that we talked about, kingdom, trying to accumulate wealth, those won't matter. What will matter is all the things that you have done to build your name in this life. That's what we'll remember when you pass away in this futile life. So, any additional comments with that? We'll move a little faster now. Set the tone here.
That depends on how man lives.
What's that?
The end of his life depends on how he lives.
Right. Yeah.
It definitely matters how somebody has lived throughout their life, as they have what the name is going to carry at the end of their life. It definitely matters how they have lived, and we have instruction for that as Christians and how we can live. But even for the man who has no instruction, who has not considered that instruction, there is a name that's being built, and the way that they have lived will be a part of that.
22:1 is good on this. It says about the same thing. Good name is rather to be chosen than great riches.
Right. Yes.
Yes, a good name is better than is to be chosen rather than the great riches. And then Proverbs 31 also kind of echoes this: who can find a wife of noble character, meaning the things that the wife brings, maybe their beauty or the possessions they have, doesn't matter as much as the name that wife you would be looking for carries as well.
Understanding that the source of a true source of a good name is God, and complying and living a life that's righteous and that honors God.
Right.
Who have tried to have a life of building a name for themselves, and it's vanity just like everything else if that's all you're doing. And so the big picture is God is what makes you have a truly good name.
Right. Yes, and I think once we we're working toward that. We have a couple of permutations of that fear God idea that we're going to see through here. We'll see another one here in chapter 7, and we're working towards that ending statement there at the end of chapter 12, where we say, fear God and keep his commandments. This is the duty of man. And that is true, and especially in building your name as well. If you're going to build a name that's worthwhile for yourself at the end of your life, the only name that you've built that matters is the one that you've built in Christ.
Does the building. He's the one that, that gave David everything that he had. He's the one. We went back in one of our recent studies, and it's like David wants to build a house for God, and God says, "No, I'm going to build a house for you, David."
Mm-hmm.
So that's how it actually works. Is God's the one that does the building. God's the one who sets us up to be good and to have a good life.
Yep. Thank you, Phil. Okay. Let's go on to verses 2 through 4. Better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. That is the end of all men, and the living will take it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by a sad countenance the heart is made better. And the heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. So we have this idea again of something that's counterintuitive. You would think that the man who lives his life without God would want to be in the house of feasting because he wants to enjoy his life here. But the writer here proposes something different. The writer here proposes that the man who goes to the house of mourning will be better off. And that's counterintuitive to today's world. Why is that better? Why would we want to be in the house of mourning even if we aren't concerned with the next life after this? Why does that make sense? Well, we know when we go to the house of mourning that there's a honest reckoning that often happens there when somebody attends is faced with the eventuality of this life, which is to be on that same bed. And so, as we are exploring that idea, we realize that this is where the end of all man. This is where it all ends. This is where we are going to eventually be in this place. We have to come to terms with that. And the implication here is that the heart of fools is not considering those things, instead creating this illusion that there is a permanence here, that there is something not worth considering after this life, that we need to figure it out here, we need to do the things that we need to do here. But the phrase there, the living will take it to heart in verse 2, the Hebrew means, the way that's translated directly says lays it upon his heart. And so this is something that's like life-shaping, it's reflection, it has an intended outcome. Isaiah 57:1 has a similar language there where it says that people in his day were failing to lay it on their hearts. And so there's a kind of a spiritual dullness there. And then you see this phrase in verse 3 of by sadness of face the heart is made glad. There's a translation here that I thought made it easier for me to kind of understand how to interpret this. And this is the NAB. It says the heart grows wiser. So the heart is almost put right, reoriented in its approach to life. And so this isn't a depression per se, but this is more like a refinement. The heart is refined. The heart grows wiser. The heart is made glad in this way. And so as we're kind of considering this, we know as people who follow God that the house of mourning is a good place for us to realize that this life has a time limit, that we are going to end up there, and there's something for us to consider afterwards. But for the person who is in vanity, who has no God in their life, why is the house of mourning a place where they should consider?
Sure. I mean, I was kind of thinking back to a lot of the kings we'll see where, if they're just chasing like the temporary pleasures of the good times, there's nothing gained from that. You're just kind of wasting time. But kind of back to what you were saying, like we're even setting aside the eternal side of things, just being aware of or, learning lessons from people about their lives will be a productive thing compared to just wasting time.
Right.
You can learn a lot from the wisdom, maybe the mistakes they've made, things that got them to this point, the things that built their name, right? Jack?
I think, usually the pieces of poetry in Ecclesiastes are kind of used to capstone previous points and segue into new ones. So he spent so much time in the last 3 chapters, focusing on the importance of a sober look at your life and understanding man's impermanence. And that's kind of the key to everything. And we're witnessing him, I guess, evolve from a standpoint of life without God, of self-fulfillment, to a mentality of you have to have God. And that's why these things are better. And so, from the perspective of somebody without God, there's truly not much value in living in the house of mourning, right? Because it's just a constant reminder of your impermanence. And if there's nothing after, right, there's nothing waiting for you in eternity, no great purpose you're part of. It's nothing more than a reminder of that. And I think that's what we're seeing here. And I mean, verses 5 and 6 are going to bring this up a lot more. But it's important. The wise will find those somber moments in life to look kind of not coldly, but right in plain view of what needs to be done and what they need to do in their life to serve God, not to have this temporary enjoyment.
Right. Yeah. Like you said, it is kind of building toward a more point. I think that eventually we're going to see we're building towards this idea of control, the amount of control that we have in our life, and really there's not much, if any at all, because we can control ourselves. But there is this idea of control that we're going to explore, and I think this is the beginning of it. There is not a control that we have over even when mourning, when this house of mourning has to happen, when there's death at the as a part of our life. And I think the way that the man who doesn't have God in his life considers the house of mourning is also important, because it is the place where the end of futility, we've already kind of talked about this, the end of futility is. And so there is an end, and we've already discussed on what a person, the wisdom that the writer has given us of what a person should be trying to enjoy in this life. And it's the things in his life that revolve around family, around building a name, around somebody remembering who you are. It's the things that eat, drink, and be merry, right? It's that idea that there is something more important than just working and trying to gather as much things as possible. And so we have this idea here that the wise are going to dwell where the truth is told, and the truth is told here at the house of mourning. But the fools are going to dwell where the truth is more suppressed, the places where we kind of hide ourselves from the fact that we have an end to this life, and we try to enjoy what we have here. And so the idea here is that grief is going to instruct. Any additional comments here on these verses before we move on? Verses 5 and 6. It's better to hear the rebuke of the wise than for a man to hear the song of fools. For the crackling of the thorns like the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of the fool. This also is vanity. So we got our first vanity statement of the chapter. And it's in regards to this idea of fools and their song. We have a relation here. I kind of preached a little bit about this a couple weeks ago, but here the Song of Fools is pretty much what we would call empty flattery. That idea that what you want to hear is what you're going to hear from these people. And the thorns, they sound loud. You know, if you've ever put any kind of briars into a fire, you know that it crackles and it lights it up really hot for just a couple of minutes, and then all of a sudden it's gone. There's nothing sustaining there. It's really quick. And so you look at that and you realize, well, if you consider how those words make us feel about how we're doing, the things that we want to hear, those are good little boosts to our confidence there for a minute there, but really there's not much value, there's not much sustenance there that can sustain us because we're not building. So at work, a lot of times, you know, the feedback I like to hear is, Andrewson's doing good, he's great to work with, he's easy to work with, he gets his projects done, all those kind of things. And then we get to the end of the year, and, you know, whenever I don't know exactly what I needed to work on, we get to the end of the year and they say, well, these are the things that you missed on at the end of the year. I'm like, well, I didn't know that. Why did I know that? And that's because I wasn't looking for that feedback a lot of times. I wasn't looking for somebody to tell me what I needed to hear. I was looking for the compliments that would help me get through my day so I don't have to worry about those things. And it's kind of the same idea here as well, where we can surround ourselves with the Song of Fools, but if we never sit down and receive that rebuke of the wise, we are not going to be better for ourselves. And so for the person without God in their life, I think there's a very easy application here. If you're always surrounding yourself and not trying to get better, you're not trying to take that real feedback that people have for you so you can be a better person, then you are going to miss out on a lot of the wisdom that can be had from people who have seen your mistakes and lived them already and turn you around from making those same mistakes as well. Any additional comments you want to make here? Chris?
Seems like, not to disagree with anything that's been said, but it seems like it's a contrast between what is true and what is easy.
Mhm.
It's easier to hear optimistic things, even though
Yes.
it's not based in reality, than it is to hear you're doing this wrong and it's actually based in truth.
Yes. Agreed.
Okay. Verses 7 through 9. Surely oppression destroys a wise man's reason, and a bribe debases the heart. The end of a thing is better than its beginning. The patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Do not hasten in your spirit to be angry, for angry rests in the bosom of fools. There's a couple of real quick statements here of wisdom. The first of which we have is that surely oppression destroys a wise man's reason, and a bribe debases the heart. And this is a warning. It's a warning toward those who have wisdom, because wisdom does not mean that you have become fortified against all the troubles of the world. It does not mean that you have now been relinquished of any kind of struggle you might have. You still have to be disciplined and apply wisdom every day. And the wisdom here is that even wisdom can be corrupted by power and money. The wisest people are not immune to the pressures of oppression and seduction. I think the greatest example we have of that is who we presume to be the writer of Ecclesiastes, the man who was the wisest on earth, still fell to the struggles of this world because of the lack of discipline in applying that wisdom as well. And so here we see the general wisdom is if you are going to be a man without God and you are going to say that you have all this wisdom, you are not immune to any of the troubles that the world might throw at you. You do not, because of your wisdom, have the ability to just disregard anything anybody would throw at you to try to change your heart. You still have to practice that wisdom daily. And then in verse 8, better is the end of a thing than its beginning. I don't know about you. I'm going to use that phrase. Ethan uses it sometimes. I don't know about you, but for me, I have about 10 different hobbies sitting in my office that I've started. I have about 20 miniatures I need to paint. I have a bunch of board games I haven't played. I have a bunch of goals on my chart for running goals or weightlifting goals that I need to do. In my garage, I have a bunch of wood for a bunch of woodworking projects. There's a lot of dissatisfaction there, though, because I haven't completed any of those projects or reached those goals yet. And so the idea here is that you need to finish things. If you want to be satisfied in your life, even if somebody without God wants to be satisfied with their life, they need to consider, how do you finish these things that you've done? A lot of us get really excited whenever we start something new because it's brand new, it's exciting, there's novelty there. But we realize that the exciting beginnings require a lot of times endurance to finish. And so that endurance is what's being spoken of here. And he follows it up with this idea of being patient in spirit and proud in spirit and contrasting those ideas. And the idea here, I believe, is that, your pride is going to give up when your reward is delayed. But the patient one finishes. And so these ideas kind of go hand in hand together. Any additional thoughts on this verse here? Dennis.
I also think it's really interesting there at the end of verse 8 that the two things here he's comparing is patience and pride.
Mhm.
Like I wouldn't do that. I would say the opposite of patience is like impatience. But he's making it a point there. Well, actually, the impatient person, that's rooted in like arrogance somehow. So I think he's delving into that to make us think a little bit harder about like this isn't really just about like did I do my goals or not. This is really speaking to like your character almost and how you approach these things.
Right. Yes, and we're going to see
Quickly here as we move into this part about anger. Again, we're hitting on that idea. And so in verse 9, do not hasten in your spirit to be angry, for angry rests in the bosom of the fools. Part of being angry, there was a time in my life where I had to go to some family therapy. And when I was in that therapy session, they had a chart. And they say, which of these feelings are you feeling right now? And given at the current time, I put my finger on anger. And the therapist there said, you know why you feel that way? And I said, why? It's because you want to change things, but you can't. I was like, oh, that's a good way of thinking about that. And I think it kind of rings true with what's being said here, because a lot of times when we're angry, we want something to change, and we want the ability to change it. Here, the writer here is bringing up the idea that anger is not something that's caused by other people, but rather it's something that we have to control ourselves. I went forward a couple weeks ago because I had a pretty similar situation to what the writer here is preaching about, and it's because a lot of times we like to take our anger and we like to blame it on somebody else. I'm angry because this person did this. I'm angry because this thing happened this way. The writer here suggests that it's a evaluation of your own character that needs to happen here. That if you are angry, you need to look introspectively and see, why are you angry? And it's something that we have, and it's good because we can control it then. We have the ability, the writer writes here, that we have the ability to take our anger and do something about it. But he puts the onus on us to do something about it. He does not put it on another person. He does not say, do not hasten to be angry in your spirit, for anger rests with the other people around you or the situation around you. Instead, he says, anger rests in the bosom of fools. And so getting back to that idea that about patience that we just talked about, that Dennis brought up, and about character, anger it needs to be looked at with your character as well. And if you're proud, there's a character thing that we need to look at there. If you're angry, well, it looks like there's another aspect of our life and character that we have to look at as well. Any additional thoughts there? Jack?
I think it's really neat to see, because this is one of those pieces of poetry in the book that really, you want to take it like bit by bit, and now this is a proverb,
Mm-hmm.
but you see Solomon here really setting up these two polar opposite characters, right? And as we go through each of these statements, he's creating this path of progression for the wise and the fool. So, he started off talking about, the wise goes to the house of mourning, and they understand their life and they understand what needs to be done. And so then they hear the rebuke of the wise and they're patient and they find fulfillment in that. But when we contrast this other path of progression, which, the one who goes to the house of feasting, he's happy and, he's just enjoying his life, but it's quick. And now all of a sudden, right now he's proud, and he's proud because he's not being patient, and he wants that happiness again, that temporary fleeting feeling. He wants to change things, and it just leads to anger, right? And so that's why I just think it's so neat that he's creating this progression here where he's like, you're patient, right? You're going to do things that aren't as enjoyable. You're going to, live in the house of mourning, but you're going to find that fulfillment, that the fool, the person who seeks joyous feasting to find that fulfillment, ends up angry because they can't change the fact that it's unfulfilling. And not to jump ahead, but that's why he's immediately going to be like, don't say, why were the former days better than these? Because if you're saying, oh, the good old days were so much better when I was a kid or a young man or whatever, it's because you were living the life of a fool and you were not looking ahead to fulfillment, and you were finding temporal joy on this earth instead of setting yourself up for eternal fulfillment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So why don't we move into, oh, sorry, go ahead, Chris.
So verse 9, in my experience, it is easier to be angry than it is to feel guilty or other emotions. But basically, it can be used as a distraction from what is real within. I've done this myself, where instead of focusing on what I needed to work on, I could be angry on somebody else doing whatever it is that they're doing. So that's one of the applications I have.
Right. Yeah. That's a really good
application. Go ahead, Phil.
Sometimes we can fall into the trap of thinking that justifying anger and feeling like, oh, I can be angry and go in and say, well, it says, be angry and sin not in Ephesians 4 and also in Psalm 4. So therefore it's not wrong, and therefore I'm justified in my anger. Yeah, you don't necessarily sin when you're angry, but our anger does not lead to a good place. There's the general rule. And in fact, Psalm 4 and Ephesians 4, he's not saying be angry, like, and in there, put a period there. The idea is when you're angry, let that calm down, because our anger does not lead to a good place. I mean, that's almost always in human history, that's the case.
Right, James?
When be slow to anger, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. I think that's the rule that we should abide by, and we see that a lot of times. I mean, a lot of us have, in anger, lashed out and said something we don't really mean to be true, or something that we don't want to be said. So we know that to be true, and anger leads to that a lot of times. Thank you. And so, as Jack was kind of pointing out, verse 10, do not say, why were the former days better than these? You do not inquire wisely concerning this. So we have this idea of echoing back and looking at the past. And we've already seen this idea, so nothing new under the sun, but we're already proving it here, right? But the idea here was brought up in chapter 1, that the endless cycle and the lack of newness is a part of this world. And so we shouldn't be surprised whenever we are looking at the world and we say, oh, okay, this is kind of the same. It's kind of nothing really new happening here. But when you first saw the idea, when you first introduced it to the world, we were like, oh, this is really cool. This is really neat. And we like to think that we have a really good memory about the things that we've done in the past. And we know exactly how it was then, and we remember exactly the scenario and all those kind of things. But we find a lot of times that our memory is kind of choosy, picky. We remember a lot of the good things, but we leave out all the details that might have surrounded the ability to get to that memory. And so I think a really good example of that is if you just take a look at Israel in Exodus. Whenever they are in the wilderness, you remember the phrases they're using, oh, wouldn't it be better if we just went back to Egypt? Why'd you bring us out here just to die? They seem to have forgotten that they have all their needs taken care of at this time. Maybe not the way that they would like to, but they are being very well taken care of. They are safe. They are not slaves anymore. Their children are not being killed. They're in a much better place under the direction of God, but yet the memories and the former days that they remember are, in their mind, better. It's not good for us to dwell on these things because it can change our perception of the present and, in fact, make us not live presently as the Bible often calls us to do. But even then, even as a man of God, as not a man of God, why would it be better for somebody to not dwell in the past? I think the question's pretty easily answered here. We've all known somebody who says, well, back in the day, it was much better this way. Somebody who is just really disappointed and dissatisfied with the current living situation that they're in because they have memories of things of when they were younger or in a different time where it was better, and it detracts from their life. And so an easy application we can see in our day-to-day life is if we just look for the people who live in that way, and you can notice that the man without God, even they should not dwell in these former memories. Go ahead.
Real quick, I think there's a tendency to be, the good old days to compare to when it was good before, and it's also sometimes the opposite where people think of, oh, this time was awful, this was terrible. But the challenge, I think, is every day, and even for our memories of good and bad, to be thankful for the good things. And in doing so, we avoid a lot of problems.
Right. Amen.
Yeah, I mean, looking back at the past is not really the issue. It's really more of the longing for the past, the things that we want to reoccur again. The longing is the futile part that we have here. And it kind of relates to what Jack was saying. We've seen the anger now, and we want to change something. Maybe we experienced it a certain way beforehand, and now we want it to be like that again. But we're just going to be in anger more, and then we're going to be dwelling in those previous times. We're just going to be dissatisfied with life. And so even for the man who does not have God, this is futile. It's not worthwhile. It's not worth your time. But for the man with God, even more so is it futile, because we have something to look towards. We have something that is going to be better in the future. There's no point in dwelling in the past except to be able to reflect on the things that we've done previously that we can be better ourselves with, and then move on. Comments? Okay, I think we're going to get exactly where I thought we would get, which is about halfway through the book. So verses 11 through 13. Wisdom is good with an inheritance, and profitable to those who see the sun. For wisdom is a defense as money is a defense, but the excellence of knowledge is that wisdom gives life to those who have it. Consider the work of God, for who can make straight what he has made crooked? I believe the wisdom here that's being spoken of isn't just wisdom of like, well, it's probably better if you put your money in the stock market than to just put it in your bank account. I don't think it's something like that. I think it's more of a godly wisdom that's being talked about here. Not the cleverness or the education of what's going on here, which the book has already found and explained to us that we would find wanting if we were to go down that path. It's more of a godly wisdom of practicality here. So it's more practical and protective like money so wisdom is more practical and protective like money, that it provides security in some ways like money does, but unlike money, our wisdom can't be stolen, it can't be lost. And that's kind of the idea here, I believe. I think 13 is also a really good verse for us to take a look at for a couple minutes, because we've already seen this idea, if you recall, and this is a while ago, in chapter 1. Back there in verse 15, it says, what is crooked cannot be straight, and what is lacking cannot be numbered. This idea of something being crooked now is attributed to God directly here, who can make straight what he has made crooked. And so I wanted to ask the question, first of all, we've come back to this idea, what's going on here? Why are we restating this idea now at this point in the book? But second of all, what does it mean? So if anybody wants to take a stab at either of the questions, that'd be awesome. Sure.
Well, when he's talking about the idea of God making things crooked, I mean, I think that's speaking to the foolishness of believing that this life is the paramount thing that we're supposed to be concerned about. Because if that's true, then what we want is to make life really, really good. And so, like, I got to have the perfect job and the perfect house and et cetera, et cetera. And his point here is, God has made the world. I want to be careful how I say this, because God only makes good things, but God has made the world imperfect because he wants us to focus on the real perfect. Amen. And so if our focus is like, I got to straighten out everything in my life here, and that's all that matters, then we're going to miss the perfection that God has intended for us. So it's speaking to this idea of that futility then. Like God made it this way. You're trying to unmake it the way he made it, and you're not going to get anywhere.
Yes, yeah, I agree with you there. There's this idea that the world is intentionally not a perfect place so that we can look toward God for what the perfect would be, kind of to summarize what Dennis was saying here. And I think that's why this idea of control starts to come into play here, because now we're looking at this idea of like, who can make straight what he has made crooked. We're trying to find ways to fill in those gaps, how to have a fulfilling life, but without God, it's not going to work. Who can make straight what even God has made crooked? It's the phrase that's used here. Asking the question there is, and the answer to that question is nobody. Nobody can do that. And so as you're trying to straighten your life and make it straight, it's not going to happen because it's not the way it's supposed to work. Without God, it's not going to happen. And so the idea here is that the wisdom means accepting that God has ordered a certain way for us to live, and living within it rather than raging against it would be the wise person's way of life. And so we see again this idea is brought up in Romans chapter 8, verse 20. Paul says creation was subjected to futility, not willing, but because of him who subjected to it. And so we see this idea kind of persisted on to the New Testament as well. You see it again in Proverbs chapter 2. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright, but he is a shield to those who walk in integrity. And so this idea here is that, again, that we have a godly wisdom that is rooted in the fear of God, which is, an idea that we're kind of building towards at the end of this book. And we have the capacity to receive the steward of whatever God grants to us in our day-to-day lives. So as we move into these next set of verses here, we'll start to notice that there's a shift. We've just talked about the first 13 verses, and you notice that a lot of these verses are ideas about what is better than something else. And starting in verse 14, we start to see a shift into this idea of like balance. We're trying to figure out how we can have a balanced life between two extremes on the end of the spectrum. And I believe we are pretty much out of time, so I won't hop into this directly, but as we are moving forward through verses 14 through 29, and we'll try to cover a lot of chapter 8 too, I want us to take a look at why have we built to this point where we have to consider a balance. And the first question we're going to see is a difficult one that I want to spend some time on, but it's the idea of too much righteousness and too much wickedness, and what does that mean? So as you're preparing for class next time, let's try to come back with some answers to that question, look at the balance of life. So any final comments? Okay, thank you so much for your participation, and I appreciate your comments, and we'll hop back in next week.